the watcher in the pines. It was never hiding from me, it was studying me. The thing that disturbs me most, even now 3 years later, in a different city, in an apartment with 3 locks on the door, is not what I found in those woods. It is what was written about me in the notebook I found there. Page after page, 53 nights of entries. My movements, my habits, my hesitations, the exact number of seconds I paused at the North Meadow's edge each night before turning back. It had been watching me since my first shift. It had been watching the family for 8 months before that. I took the position in March of 2022, private security for the Aldrin family. Gerald and Helena, late 60s, old money, the kind of people who own land the way other people own furniture, without thinking about it, as if it has always simply been there. Their property was 81 acres of dense Pacific Northwest forest, Douglas fir and western cedar, so thick that by midday the canopy blocked enough light to make the interior feel like dusk. The house was a 3-generation timber frame structure set deep in the property, connected to the access road by a single gravel lane that wound through half a mile of trees, beautiful, remote, and utterly isolated in the way that only very old and very wealthy places manage to be. Gerald Aldrin hired me after what he called an incident. He would not describe it. When I pressed him gently, professionally, he said only that something had been disturbed on the property and that he wanted eyes on the perimeter at night. Helena said nothing during our entire first meeting. She sat at the far end of the kitchen table with her hands folded and looked at the window the whole time, as if she expected to see something in the glass. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to that. The first month was quiet. I walked the perimeter trail twice per shift, a 2-mile loop through the trees marked with reflective posts every 50 yards, with a motion-activated camera at the North Meadow approach, one at the south tree line and one covering the access lane. I checked the outbuildings. I logged everything. I saw nothing. The forest at night was absolute. No ambient light from roads or towns reached this far in, and without my torch, the darkness under the canopy was the kind that has physical weight, that presses against your eyes as if testing whether they still work. The feeling began on my 31st night. Not a sound, not a movement, a feeling, specific, directional, and entirely different from the vague unease that nighttime forests produce in most people. This was located. It came from the northwest quadrant of the tree line, 60 to 70 meters in from the meadow's edge, and it was consistent. Every time I crossed the upper meadow, the feeling arrived at the same point on the trail and followed me to the same point at the far edge before it stopped. Like a beam, like being inside a beam of attention that had a fixed source. I noted it in my log as a subjective observation, unconfirmed. I told myself it was the trees. I told myself isolation does things to the mind. I have worked night security in warehouses, hospitals, construction sites, and empty office towers. I know the difference between being alone and being watched. That meadow was never empty. I understand that now. On the 36th night, during my second perimeter pass at approximately 2 a.m., I heard movement inside the northwest tree line. Not an animal. Animals, even large ones, have a biological rhythm to their movement. An unconscious pattern driven by instinct and breath. This had no rhythm whatsoever. It stopped precisely when I stopped. It moved when I moved. I stood at the meadow's edge for 6 full minutes, torch off, listening to something 10 feet inside the tree line match the pace of my breathing. And then gradually, over the course of perhaps 30 seconds, The sound of its breathing slowed and quieted, as if it had caught itself and was making a deliberate correction. I swept my torch through the trees. The beam caught nothing. Trunks, undergrowth, the vertical dark beyond. Whatever it was, it understood the difference between the lit edge of a torch beam and the dark just outside it. It had positioned itself accordingly. On the 39th night, the North Meadow camera produced a gap in its recording. 44 minutes of footage, simply absent. No corruption, no power interruption. The camera had recorded before the gap and after it without interruption. 44 minutes of whatever crossed that meadow had been deliberately erased, not by tampering with the hardware, which showed no signs of interference, but by some method of interrupting the recording process itself that left no trace I could identify, and that the security company's technician, when I called him, said he had never seen before. He said it as if it were an interesting technical puzzle. I did not find it interesting. I found it terrifying. Which is different. On the 40th night, I left the trail. I pushed into the northwest tree line at the point where the feeling was always strongest, moving without the torch, navigating by the faint ambient glow that filtered through the canopy. 40 meters in, the undergrowth opened into a natural hollow formed by 3 massive cedars growing in a rough triangle. And inside that hollow, invisible from the trail, invisible from every camera angle I could conceive, arranged with a neatness that was more disturbing than any disorder could have been. A camp, a sleeping bag, rolled and strapped, a fire pit with a stone ring, the ash pile deep, weeks of fires at minimum, perhaps months, waterproof storage containers sealed, holding food that was not old, a change of dry clothing, folded, a pair of binoculars, military grade, with a lens coating that prevented reflection, and positioned at the precise gap in the cedar trunks that offered an unobstructed sightline to the upper meadow trail. A low folding stool, worn smooth with use, angled to within 2 degrees of the exact spot where I always paused during my north patrol. The fire pit ash was warm, not the residual warmth of hours, the warmth of perhaps 2 hours. Whatever had been here had left shortly before I arrived. It had known I was coming into the trees. It had been watching me cross the meadow and had left before I reached it, moving through 40 meters of dark undergrowth without sound, without light, without disturbing a single branch in a way that I heard. That is what I think about. Not the camp, not the binoculars, the silence of its exit, the precision of it, the knowledge that it had seen me leave the trail and had calculated correctly exactly how long it had before I reached the hollow. It had made that calculation before, many times. It knew the timing of my movements better than I did. I found the notebook inside a waterproof bag tucked beneath the sleeping bag. I should not have opened it. I have never stopped wishing I hadn't, but I did. And I stood there in the dark between those 3 cedar trees and read by torchlight what had been recorded about me and about the Aldrin family for the better part of a year. The entries began 8 months before my first shift. Gerald and Helena, their movements, their schedules, which lights came on, in which rooms at which hours. The entries were written in a small, precise hand without emotion, in the tone of a naturalist recording the behavior of animals. Over time, the entries grew more detailed, specific observations about which windows Gerald opened in the morning, whether Helena walked the garden path clockwise or counterclockwise, which exterior lights the family had stopped checking because they had burned out and not been replaced. It had not been mapping the property, it had been mapping the people. learning every gap in their attention, every blind spot, every unguarded moment repeated often enough to become predictable. My entries began on my first night, patrol times to the second, which sections of the trail I walked faster, where I paused, and for how long. The note on night 12 read, "He always stops at the North Meadow marker for longer than any other point. He is looking at the tree line. He does not know what he is looking for." The final entry was dated the previous night. It read, "He is beginning to come closer to the trees. Tonight he stopped 4 meters from the edge. He will enter the tree line within the week. I will be gone before he reaches the hollow." The record is complete. The record is complete. I have thought about those 4 words every day since, what they mean, what completing the record means. What comes after the record is complete. The sheriff's department searched the property for 3 days and found boot prints that led north through the forest to a logging road a mile beyond the property line, where tire impressions in the soft shoulder indicated a vehicle had been parked regularly for an extended period. No plates, no witnesses, no further trace. The Aldrins sold the property within 6 months. They would not tell me what the original incident had been, the thing that made them hire security in the first place. I think now that they knew what was in those trees and hired me not to protect themselves, but because they believed a guard's presence might satisfy it, might give it something to study, might buy them time, I think it worked. I think they bought their time with mine. I do not work private security anymore. I do not spend time in forests. I do not stand near tree lines at night. And I have moved twice since leaving that property, because once, 3 weeks after I resigned, I found a folded piece of paper slipped under my apartment door. On it, in the same small, precise handwriting from the notebook, was written a single line: "The new record has begun."